startups, don't we love them? Don't we love the culture and the brilliant ideas that come from them? And how great to hear those increased money flows into those companies. But what those investors, founders, entrepreneurs and communities really want is those startups to move and scale. And scale things like marketing and commercialization, so teams and processes, but very importantly, in our blockchain, crypto, Web3 space, it's about scaling the technologies as well. And that's why we have this panel of 3 brilliant, well, you can make that assessment later, people that are going to give their hints and tips to you about scaling. Do you want that? Yeah, so what we're going to do is open up with a classic and just, hey guys, tell us all a little bit about yourself. Remember, we're on a time limit, 30 seconds about yourself, and then 1.5 to 2 minutes every question that follows.
Does this one work? Okay. Gordon Little, I'm co-founder and managing director of Iress Blockchain. We started this business as BC Gateways back in 2018. Went live with a private blockchain servicing financial services in 2019. And in 2020, we were lucky enough to be acquired by Iress. And we've been expanding and growing our private blockchain use cases across financial services since.
Shane here from Crypto Tax Calculator. Founded the product back in 2018 after having my own crypto tax nightmare. Support over 500 different integrations. The back office solution for probably over 1,000 accountants now, 90,000 users, and quite a complex issues around crypto taxes, which I'm sure some of the audience has dealt with previously.
Hi all, Paul Kang. So I'm the co-founder of Entersoft. We're a blockchain, fintech, cybersecurity company. We bring in a hacker's mindset in helping secure exchanges, blockchain projects, go down to smart contract audits, protect them from scams, etc. The biggest thing is the blockchain crypto space brings about a lot of different threats. It brings cyber criminals, it lures them to easy funds that they can obtain. So we work with some exciting projects, gives us, we've been able to learn a lot during the last 3 to 4 years, but the space is targeted heavily. So yeah, it's exciting to be part of this emerging tech space.
Can you just hand the mic to, yep, I'm picking on you next. What I'll do is do some very specific questions to each person because they're all in the space together, but as you all know, it's quite unique. So Shane, who does that crypto tax calculator, and by the way, congratulations, somebody in the audience already said to me today, we could not do what we do without Shane's calculator. So awesome work. But here's a very specific question for you. You know how people move assets around between level 1 and level 2, and why do people make that shift? And can you give us some guidance about moving assets, particularly in light with your expertise of tax?
Yeah, so the topic of the conversation around scaling from a technology point of view, there's this concept in cryptocurrency where you've got the L1, which is like the base chain, and you've got an L2 for whatever reason. It's kind of like a side chain or some other setup. And to move, it's quite common to be able to move assets between, chains, and particularly from an L1 to an L2. And from a scaling solution point of view, it makes sense, but there's still a lot of questions when it comes to the tax consequences of these types of projects and what happens when you do move an asset from one chain to another. In the context of scaling, like if you move ETH from an L1 to an L2, there isn't very clear guidance from tax authorities, not just in Australia, but it's quite a global phenomena here as to what the potential tax consequences are. And depending on who you talk to, perhaps, and also depending on the circumstances, in some circumstances it might be considered a disposal from a tax perspective. And this isn't something that's immediately intuitive to people when they're, bridging crypto from one network to another. and this is, one of those topics that it's going to take time for the tax authorities to first of all develop an understanding of what's even going on and the reasons why this shouldn't be treated as a disposal from a tax point of view versus why it might be. And there's these kind of details, right? Like the devil's in the detail when it comes to bringing this technology mainstream and all the kind of intricacies that can come up that still needs to be, as an industry, I think we need to do we're already doing it, like part of this blockchain week is, a major focus of it is educating regulators, but it's just a lot of details. It's a lot more than just Bitcoin itself and cryptocurrency. It's, really just digital assets and a digital economy and all the different things that can occur in that.
So the devil's in the detail, not the tax office?
Yeah, certainly. It's also, from a global point of view, you've got different tax jurisdictions, different legal rulings and different tax treatments in different tax jurisdictions. There's definitely a lot of complexities as we do try to move the technology to a wider adoption.
Great, thanks. And therefore, it's all about understanding those consequences. If you hand them, yep, I'm going to go to you next, Paul. Those in the sector know that there are always challenges in creating community. Paul, we were discussing before and you mentioned, you highlighted a few like, cybercrime, scams, phishing and various threat vectors. Would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the space of crypto moves so quickly. We've got funding coming in, we're building communities, we're trying to get products live. The biggest thing, one of the things back in 2017, we were fortunate to work with an ICO at the time, Haven, raising 20 mil. They raised it within 2 hours. But during that time, they were targeted heavily. They had 2 Telegram groups, probably close to 150,000 public members. And during that time, I think we took down something like 27 fake websites, 17 fake blog sites, etc. So the fear of missing out or the opportunity that lures a lot of sort of naive individuals into this space allows cyber criminals to target these users with fake websites, phishing attacks and things like that. It's not so complicated. It's quite straightforward. It costs about $20 to buy a domain, spin up a fake website which looks exactly the same as the real thing, but just sort of the awareness and everything's not there. So for organizations like that, it's just sort of understanding what are your threats, where are the various vectors that cyber criminals are going to try and exploit you. And that's what sort of creates a bit of the negativity in this space is due to, one, the pace that we're sort of innovating at and growing at, but then secondly, how do we stop that? So that's the things and challenges that we come across, and it's very interesting.
What I found interesting about that is it's a similar message. It's about understanding the consequences and it's about being educated and informed, and that's where panels like this will help us. Guess whose go it is this time? I'll hand the mic over for you. There was a little bit of talk earlier about private blockchains. Oh, no, we'll do this one. That's fine. So you've got background in that. And if you could explore a little bit for us, Gordon, about the technical and use case challenges of private blockchains.
Thanks. So the technical challenge is about 5% of the community challenge. And when we started, and just give you a flavor for what we do, we're not doing crypto as such. We're connecting financial planners to fund managers, to platforms, to registries, to custody banks, to share data and information that's needed to be shared across multiple parties who don't trust each other, but they have to trust each other. And today they do it by SFTP, email, a whole range of things. They're inefficient, and really a number of those things have led to the Hain Royal Commission, which identified, major flaws in people's ability to comply with the legislation. And when we launched, my background's financial services. I've had senior roles. I went out to my 10 best friends and I said, hey, back us, we've got a blockchain, it's really cool. They said, we're in, when everybody else is in. No, we're in, but we're in when everybody else is in. And it's that chicken and egg. So, if you're just doing an app on top of a blockchain, you sell to one person at a time. When you're launching a whole new blockchain, you need a community to start with. And I was listening to somebody the other day, I wasn't at this conference, somewhere else, and he was just saying, much easier to start with a community and then throw in a blockchain than to go, I've got a great use case, now I got to build a community. If you can find the community, you can find the burning bush, the blockchain bit's the easy bit. So I'd say, anybody looking at it, that would be my first thing is don't start with a great use case but no community. It's really, really hard. The second thing, not all money is the same. If you're a startup and you're looking for investors, cash is cash. Cash with somebody who brings a community means a lot more. And Iress for us was that perfect investor because they already service 20,000 financial planners and all the trading systems they have and all the brokers, gave us an instant community to build on what we already had for credibility. And I say, make sure you're partnering with people who give you community, who give you credibility, and who give you a balance sheet. And because the last thing I'll say is just, it's really great, even if they're your friends, and they go, we're going to invest, and you say, we want you to invest time and connect to us, right to our APIs, do it. They go, but will you be there in a week? Will you be there in 6 months? So having a balance sheet or somebody behind you, probably the third bit I would say is really critical to achieving success.
In a snapshot, cash, community, credibility, really important. That's great. Told you you'd get tips. Okay. Yep. Guess who? Your go. Cryptocurrencies versus digital transformation of financial assets. Shane. You're aware consideration needs to be made about how tax applies in an economy where there's so many different financial instruments. Can you give some tips on managing around that?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to my initial point there with the regulators and the communication as an industry to these regulators. I think when we're in the industry, over the last 4 years in particular, we've seen the increased complexity within the ecosystem. And originally there was Bitcoin, which is like, a payment system, like a currency or a store of value. There's that concept which is pretty well understood by regulators, I think. Like, they get this perception of what Bitcoin is and the value proposition to a degree, or what we're trying to do in that area. But, there's a kind of the actual technology underlying that initial system has been adopted in different use cases now. And we're seeing, private blockchains. We've got the EVM type style chains. You've just got a lot of additional things coming into the space. And then when we're communicating to regulators, who are outside of the industry, this isn't what they're thinking about all day, every day. They might not be that involved in, the cryptocurrency space in general. Their perception of what this actually is might be fairly unsophisticated. And you kind of get this situation where, you can kind of get everything bucketed into a particular category, such as like, the whole industry is cryptocurrency, and what does cryptocurrency mean? And you might agree with the thesis behind Bitcoin as a store of value or as an alternative form of currency, or you might flat out not agree. And, as a regulator who might not be involved in the space, they might fall on the other side of the camp, and they don't really get the complexities beyond that. They've kind of just labelled the entire industry as one category, and they're not looking any deeper. And there's a lot of consequences of this. Like, the one consequence is, just advancing the industry. It's like, okay, well, you might not believe this thesis, but what about this other technology and this other idea here, which might not be like a private blockchain? Maybe there's something around that, or EVMs, or, decentralized lending protocol, or whatever you're doing. There's all these different kind of value propositions now. It's just technology. It's like, the internet. It's got all these different use cases. It's kind of, that's how I kind of see this industry kind of growing as we do scale up. And it's really coming back to, is this cryptocurrency, or is it the digital transformation of assets? And if you're thinking about it as like, okay, we're kind of digitizing all of these different types of assets. We've got new types of assets like Bitcoin, but then we've got existing assets that are now being digitized. There's all these kind of like smart contracts and all these different systems that you can do now. You know, getting that across the line to regulators and making them aware that it's not just this little thing that might burn out, or, you know, that was their perception originally, that this whole thing's just going to burn out. But there's actually kind of like this digital transformation, and getting that message across that there's, you know, this is a V2 of, like, you know, you look at the banking system, it was made 30 years ago, some of that software infrastructure, and there's got a lot of pain points around it. This is really just digital transformation of a lot of different assets. And so you do need to become extremely sophisticated, because you could see the impact of digital transformation, just say in the workplace over the last 2 years, and how much of an impact that's made in changes in human behaviour. And this is probably going to have a similar type of impact over the next 10 years. So yeah, just communicating that is really important.
Hey, I worked on a number of those 30 years ago banking and mining systems. But yeah, we all had to start somewhere. Okay, the mic's in the right hand there. This is about scale. So let's do a little bit deeper into scale, in particular, Paul, about security and scaling.
Yeah, so there's so many various areas in cyber, like you probably need 2 hours to just have a deep conversation on scale and cyber and the various impacts of cyber awareness or scams or development, etc. But there's two things, I guess, in the crypto space. One is fast pacing, building communities. Secondly is developing products. So when you look at it from a development angle, all developers have a lot of constraints. So it's things around functionality, budgets, timeframes, get a product out there, and then you sort of think about security or if something happens. So one of the biggest things we try and educate customers is to be proactive. Look into security before you're launching products, but look at things into building security into sort of developers' mindsets, so that as you're building, you're thinking of the threats, you're understanding the various attack vectors and ways that cyber criminals can exploit applications. And especially in the crypto space, as we mature, we're starting to build more sort of DeFi apps, NFT apps, which are becoming more consumer-facing based. So that will bring about a lot more sort of visibility. It creates more applications, more digitalization, which then allows cyber criminals to find various other ways to exploit. So you can never be 100% secure, but it's just aiming for that sort of 99.99%, just lifting various areas of your organization's sort of capability, whether it be development, whether it be people, whether it be process, and trying to mature that along the way. Doesn't happen overnight, it's a journey, so slow and steady wins the race.
It's interesting what you talk about, because the beginning, crypto and blockchain were so closely tied together and people had trouble then separating it. But this guy has no trouble, and this will be our last question on the panel, and it's for you, Gordon, and it's about non-crypto blockchains still having value.
So we started with non-crypto and financial services for a reason. There was a lot of people and projects out there, and as soon as you do crypto, moving money, transactions with the stock exchange, etc., you need a much bigger balance sheet and you need a much bigger lead time to do that. So we started with, let's start with data. Let's start with data that people don't need to be as nervous about sharing with each other. They still need to share it, and then build out on that. And then at some point you could tokenize it, turn it to crypto, etc. And on that journey, you realize there's lots of use cases for blockchain for non-crypto based solutions. And those are usually based around a community of organizations who, for a number of reasons, have to trust each other, but don't necessarily have legal contracts in place or a structure to do that. So in financial services, you have a financial planner who sells products for insurers and fund managers, who appoint custodians, who have registries, they don't all have contracts together, but if somebody makes a mistake, if a unit holder gets the wrong tax outcome, the wrong financial outcome, they all have to figure out who's going to pay. And because of that, they all keep copies of the same documents. They all duplicate everything. Same things happens in medical and medical shipping. The same things happen in agribusiness, where you're growing and shipping. You have multiple supply chains that don't all have contracts. It's 3 or 4 layers down from the actual producer, but they need to rely on documentation from the producer. And I think there's lots of those use cases still exist where the blockchain can create that community of trust, simplify complex older systems that are all point-to-point, still very much overnight batch processed, keeping duplicates of data and then reconciling them every day between each other. I think the average bank, probably 20% of their staff reconcile data between the banks. They all share data and they all reconcile to each other every night, when if they had a blockchain in the middle for some of those bits of data, they could probably reduce their cost by 10%. But, and that's probably my time. I'm getting wrapped up, but I'll let you go.
It's amazing what a physical movement does. Okay, so I'd give a wrap, but we are on time. How about let's just give a clap and cheers for this panel.